Hi, I'm Michael Woody. Today I'm joined by Dr. Karl Aspelund. And now, let's talk textiles. Welcome, everyone, to Talking Textiles. I'm Michael Woody, CEO of Transtex LLC, chairperson of the Rhode Island Textile Innovation Network, and a member of the Advanced Textiles Association. The goal of this podcast is to get to know the wide variety of positions and markets that make the advanced textiles world turn. We'll be talking to professionals in different roles throughout this series to help inspire the next generation of textile professionals and anyone interested in learning more about others' journeys in the world of textiles. ATA offers advanced textiles content throughout the year, including the upcoming Advanced Textiles Expo 2026, taking place November 3 through 5 in Orlando, Florida. Connect with industry professionals and discover the latest innovations that will drive your business forward. Visit textiles.org/events to learn more. Our featured guest is Dr. Karl Aspelund, Associate Director of the URI Honors Program and Associate Professor of Design and Design Theory in the College of Business at the University of Rhode Island, and my collaborator within the Rhode Island Textile Innovation Network. Hi, Karl. How does a young person growing up in Iceland end up in the U.S. textile industry?
Well, before coming here from Iceland, I had actually been involved in costuming for theater. And I worked for 20 years actually as a designer of costume set lighting for theater and film. But it goes actually further back than that, in that my grandfather was a gentleman's tailor and my grandmother was a seamstress. They had a workshop in their home. And some of my earliest memories are of playing under the cutting table. I was given the task, I was given a big magnet and given the task of getting the pins off the floor. So there was actually blood. So you could say that it is in my blood since then. And as I was designing for theater in Iceland, I stumbled into teaching in a tailoring department.
You were basically teaching tailoring.
No, I was not teaching the tailoring. I was teaching costume history and design in a tailoring department at Technical College in Reykjavik. So when I moved to the US in 1996, the logical thing was to look for teaching gigs alongside the designing. And I landed a course at URI in the fall of 1996, teaching one course.
And had you known about URI in advance, or was this something that just
Yes.
popped?
No, I had contacted URI before leaving Iceland. They did not have an open position, but then they somehow tracked me down after I had been in the country for 2 months, and a position had opened for an adjunct teaching apparel design. So I took that. That was the gateway drug, and I've been here since. It's my 30th year at URI this coming fall.
Excellent. So, what does the University of Rhode Island offer students in terms of the textiles curriculum?
URI is essentially an old school program. We continued being what a lot of programs used to be. We offer essentially the entire show. We've got the full supply chain. If I would walk you down the hall in Quinn Hall of our department, you'd have a sewing lab where we do the draping and the pattern making and the sewing instruction. You'd have a design room where we do apparel design. You would have an office of a professor of marketing. You would have a professor of merchandising. There was a historian on our floor who has just retired. We're going to reopen that position next year. Down at the other end of the hall, there is a textile lab for the textile science, the chemistry of textiles, for assessment of textiles, development of textiles. Plus, there's a whole host of adjuncts teaching things like color science, more design, still more marketing courses, and we're housed in the College of Business. So we actually afford our students access to the resources of that college. So it's a very powerful combination of things, and we can offer students more than they actually can imagine, because most students don't realize the breadth and the depth of this field. Plus, we have a graduate program that does a lot of work in both the marketing, merchandising side and conservation. So we have students working in museums all over the United States.
And the university is also involved to a certain degree with smart textiles as well. Is that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. The engineering department here, with whom we collaborate, they are doing amazing work on wearable textiles. Professor Mancodia has a lab where he's doing a lot of work in the medical field. But there is also research on the military side for the Navy, specifically in the College of Engineering, and people are doing really amazing work over there.
So the University of Rhode Island is a land grant university. Can you explain what that is and how it influences the university's connection to our textile companies here in Rhode Island?
Absolutely. I mean that I'll try and make it brief, but we are both a land and sea grant university. But basically, what this means is that over 100 years ago, universities like this were created, given land to be on, essentially, and to generate profit from, with the mandate that these universities would then be responsible for supporting local industry, local agriculture, local fisheries, uh, basically being a support hub for the local economy. So it's hardly surprising that we in the textiles department look to our responsibility toward the textile industry in Rhode Island. This is actually written into the charter of the university.
I want to pivot now because of that land grant aspect and how important it is in terms of connecting with companies here in Rhode Island. I want to segue now into a little background on the Rhode Island Textile Innovation Network, because that's basically, Karl, how you and I came together I think it was about 8-9 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So just for the folks out there, the Rhode Island Textile Innovation Network was founded in 2014 at the urging of Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Senator Whitehouse brought all of the textile companies in Rhode Island into a room, and he was insistent that we create some sort of association or group that would continue to promote the health of the textile companies here in Rhode Island, since the textile industry basically began here in Rhode Island at Slater Mill in Pawtucket. So our textile companies all came together as of 2014 and founded the Rhode Island Textile Innovation Network. And it includes Rhode Island's textile companies, but not just the textile companies. It also includes universities like URI, our manufacturing extension partnership, Polaris, AFOA is involved, and there are other government organizations and agencies also involved. So we're more an affiliation. Wrighton is more an affiliation than an association. We basically provide a reason and a place to gather more than anything else that had not existed before. So our mission basically consists of what I call the 3 C's. The first is we hope to close the skills gap in textile manufacturing here in Rhode Island. Secondly, it's collaboration with the parties I mentioned previously: academia, government, the K through 12 education system, and the community, as well as organizations like AFOA. And finally, the third C is create business opportunities for our textile companies. So basically, it's close the skills gap, collaborate, and then create business opportunities for our textile companies. And Karl, you and I think you and I got together. I think one of our first efforts was a survey on students' perceptions of textile companies, local textile companies. And you probably remember that. So can you give us a little background? I don't recall exactly how that started. I think it started from your end.
It did, because we obviously found, like so many other programs did, that our students had gradually, it's not the students' fault, but the separation between academia and industry had become too large. And this had been gradually taking place, of course, over the space of more than 10 years, just as the industry went, starting in the late 80s, going into the early 2000s, as the business of textiles and apparel became the business, our students became more design oriented, and this whole connection with the industry became frayed, if not separated. And so we became interested in trying to find out what really was happening on the ground.
It's an
And
interesting point because one of the first things
yeah,
we discovered as a group when the textile companies all came together and started exploring things that we felt were necessary right up at the top of the list because we knew we had to close the skills gap was changing the hearts and minds of students and their parents about what textile companies do, what the environment is like. I'm sorry
yes.
to interrupt, but go ahead.
Oh, no, 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 absolutely great. And I remember our early conversations about this, and then the first events that we held that were just sort of almost survey events where we just gathered people in a room and just, okay, what are we doing here? What is this thing, textiles and textile manufacturing in Rhode Island? It was almost like a reality check back there in 2018 or 2019 in our first gatherings. And then when we got the students involved, that's when things, at least from my perspective, became very interesting and productive because the students looked at this and said, wow, we had no idea.
Yeah, that was my initial impression was that the students, they knew a lot about textiles, but they didn't know a lot about, or textiles in general, and perhaps apparel, but not that much about advanced textiles or industrial textiles. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember taking them on visits, and then when we brought people in, when we had our first co-event here with the students and the whole list that you read through, there was academia, government, Senator Whitehouse was there. There was this wonderful event where suddenly everybody was in the room. And like you just said, it really was so important to have a place to gather where these voices could come together and the students could talk to the industrialists and the industrialists can talk to the teacher. And we realized that our goals are just right there. We really could very, very quickly articulate our common vision for a future. And that's where things took off.
And I think that was our first event. That was the textile industry. We called it a networking fair. That was back in February of 2019. That was
That's
our
right.
first true gathering, including the community from the University of Rhode Island. We followed that up with, and I think this was your baby, the curriculum study for the TMD department. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yes. I mean, and that came again from the idea that we had grown distant from the local community, if you will, and and this idea that if we are a land grant university with a textile department, then we needed to step back and take a look at that connection. And so not only making those connections, but what connections can be made, and who are the people here? Who are the companies? What are we actually teaching the students? How can we make connections between these? And so we gradually amplified that, surveying the students, checking in on the companies, and then things got a little bit muddled there during the pandemic years. But then we had another event that kind of ignited things where we had actually a student-driven session where we invited again the same groups. There were academics in the room. There was industry in the room. There was government representation, but the students presented their vision.
And that was the sustainability forum, right?
Yes, actually, there was a class that I was teaching a couple of years ago in the honors program, not in the textiles department, but it was about the circularity, circular economies in textiles in the Rhode Island area. And it came organically out of the student work. And it was actually a student suggestion. Wouldn't it be great if we got the manufacturers into the room and showed them what we were doing? And of course, to your credit, you just said yeah, and you rounded up, you rounded up the writing folks, and we had this marvelous session. And I remember the students presenting, and at the end of it, it was like a good party, where you end the good party, and somebody says, "Hey, we should do this more often."
No.
Yeah,
And I'm going to ask you to back to the curriculum study.
yeah.
One question that I thought was interesting as someone who participated in that survey, one of the companies that participated in the survey, The way you framed it, I thought, was excellent. It was the specific question, and all questions led from this one. What will the class of 2030, graduating class of 2030, need to know about textiles? I just thought that was a fascinating way to approach it.
Yeah, and I've been it's part of what I do, being a professor of design and design theory, to occasionally go into the long-term thinking. So this was 2030 was still a while away back then. The 2030 study grew out of conversations that we were having on a larger scale in the university of what we needed to be for the class of 2030. And 2030 was almost an arbitrary pin on the map at that point. It was suitably far away, as one does in future vision. Not so far that it just became in pure imagination, but far enough away that it needed some stretching. And I think the good thing about that survey, apart from the outcomes, is just as you're pointing out, the thinking that it forced. It put not just you, but us and the students who were also involved into that time frame of thinking in portions of lifetimes. It's like, yeah, okay, 2030 is beyond a couple of fiscal years. It's beyond an election cycle. It's out there. And what do they need to know was a very, I think, as you say, a very good way of phrasing that, because that took it away from sort of any kind of self-interest on anybody's part. It became about the students. It became about what are we here to do for them. And so I think that was a really good way of starting a conversation that we're now still having, and actually, and I'm sure we'll get to that in a moment, producing things in response.
You were talking about the Sustainability Forum and some of the conversations there. And one of the things that I was struck about the conversation there was there was quite a bit of conversation about, in terms of sustainability, particularly on the apparel side. Everyone agrees that apparel needs to be more sustainable, but the question was, are people, and by people I mean consumers, willing to pay for it? And can it be produced at a price that people can afford? Remember that conversation?
I do, and we're still having that conversation. As a matter of fact, in a class I'm teaching right now called What is Good Design, we actually had that conversation just yesterday. It comes up now organically out of the student group, because they understand the dynamics. They see the world they're living in, and they recognize the disconnect.
On that point about apparel sustainability, I think we followed that up in 2023. Now we're post-pandemic with a joint webinar on Made in USA apparel, which people were still uncomfortable about getting back together, but we're still on the webinar phase at that point. But I remember that being quite successful, and people be very interested, students particularly being interested in that.
Very much so, and that's another. I mean, just like the sustainability issue, the Made in USA issue is there, right there on the same shelf, if you will. Yeah, wonderful. Made in USA, fabulous, great. Will you pay more for it? No. And so it's about attitudes. It's about a mindset. And one of the things I think we're really going to have to do, both in the industrial world and in the classroom, is we really have to start addressing the mindset, and we have to start having conversations with the consumers, with the world at large, about the mindset, the attitude that goes into this. We've gone down a path that has led us into some fairly difficult areas here, and we can't get out of it with just one part of this world working on it. And that's what prompted us back there to get everybody in the room, because it has to be industry, it has to be academia, it has to be the students, it has to be the consumers. We can't have this conversation just by ourselves over here. That makes no sense.
In terms of the long-term vision, we began to address that jointly when you came up with 2 years ago in 2024 the idea of a future textiles council. Can you talk a little bit about that, like the genesis of it and what that council has been able to do thus far?
The Future Textiles Council was actually something that came out of that first event where the students presented their circularity plans. The vibe at the end of that meeting, as I mentioned, was, hey, this was fun. Let's do this again. And out of that, in conversations that followed, the idea was that we would form a group, nothing terribly formal, an interactive space, if you want to call it that, a place to meet, get everybody in the room, and talk about the future. Now, 2030 was creeping closer, so the future is further away, but we actually very successfully, twice last year, gathered interested parties, small business owners, manufacturers. There were representations for government there, academics, students. We had people. We had one producer beaming in from New Zealand. We had people coming in from Massachusetts. The interest this generated, just in its sort of beginning stage, was quite amazing. And what we did there was we looked at the state of the world. What does this look like? What do we need? How can we actually solve it? And the beauty of those two meetings, and we're looking forward to a meeting now in May, was that we came up with a lot of very well-defined areas where we had very clear solution-oriented visions on what needed to be done.
Can you describe some of those areas, Karl?
The one to obviously describe is the one about education, which we actually then started working on. So that's probably a good one to talk about because it does actually have practical results already. But one of the things that came out of those two meetings, the first one was rather broad, the second one kind of drilled down into things, was the need for information. It was just like we said before. There are all these students. There's us. Even we don't know what's happening on the ground here. And we need to know, what does this world look like? What is the world of textiles and textile manufacturing in Rhode Island, in the Narragansett Bay region? What is it? If we don't know what it is, we can't work with it. We can't work with sustainability, with Made in USA, with reshoring, if we don't know what is actually happening on the ground. And so what we did then was to start defining these projects, and the education project took off because we, in conversations, Robert Finnegan from FOA became interested and joined us in these efforts. And with their support and funding, for which we're very grateful, we have actually managed to start a program of creating educational materials on the manufacturing here in this area that we can then use to educate at the K through 12 level, in the community colleges, at the university levels, in a series of stackable certificates. And we're going to work on this for the next 3 or 4 years and come up with something where a student who's interested in the industry can stack up those certificates and then either show up to an employer or show up at a college and say, hey, look, I have this, I've done this, I have this knowledge of the reality on the ground.
And that was
an enormous strength.
That was serendipity too, because as URI, the University of Rhode Island, was going through that process of determining how to work with industry, I know that FOA was completing an industry needs assessment. And that industry needs assessment unveiled the idea of crafting regionally focused education and workforce training programs in textile regions. So we had the impetus from the University of Rhode Island, the impetus from the FOA, and then of course, Ryton has always been looking for ways to close the skills gap. So those two things came together into this course curriculum that we put together for this spring in the University of Rhode Island in your area. Can you talk a little bit about, I'll explain a little bit about it, but I'll let you go into the details. What we did at Ryton is we enlisted 8 volunteer companies to go in and actually present to students about their companies, their supply chains, their distribution networks, and talk to them about, as one student called it, not merely textiles, but the business of textiles, connecting directly with students, 8 companies connecting directly with students in the classroom. And why don't you talk a little bit about your experience with that and how you think it's going? We're about 2/3 of the way through now, right? Or 3/4.
Better than that, Michael. We're better than that. We've got 7 out of 8 done already. The last one is coming in in a couple of days, and it's been absolutely wonderful. It's been absolutely marvelous. I have a small team of students, all seniors in the textiles department. Oh no, wait a minute, sorry. There was a freshman who joined us because she wanted to transfer into the textiles department, so I recruited her. But we have these students and a graduate student who's the teaching assistant, and they've been doing an absolutely marvelous job of researching these companies before the guest comes in, preparing questions. Then we sit down in a conference room and we actually video the encounter. So the visitor from the company tells us about themselves, tells us about their processes, their products, their trials and tribulations, and the students have a large grab bag of questions to work with once that's done. And we've been getting some remarkable footage out of this, and this footage is what is going to become the anchoring part of these course materials that I was talking about earlier. So these will be essentially asynchronous online course units of about 1 college credit's worth of engagement, or about 45 hours for each one, that will actually then walk a student through the nature of, the reality of textile manufacturing in this area. And we'll edit this into a gradually progressing level of complexity once we have footage in the bag. But I'll tell you, what we have so far is absolute gold. Described it to one of our guests the other day, that while they were speaking and I had my eyes on the camera and was listening, it was like a slot machine paying off. It was incredible. There were bells going off in my head as they were speaking.
I know we have at least 3 ATA member companies presenting. TransTex, my company. I know Brookwood has presented. Darlington has presented. There may be
Darlington
others.
Was there. Amerizone was there. Nautilus Defense was there. It's been absolutely great, and everybody has been so gracious and generous of their information and time, and the students absolutely blown away. My regret now is that we did not have these sessions longer, and that I did not recruit more students into the room. But there are more years to come, so hopefully I can do that.
Well, my experience was that I couldn't get out of the room because we finished I think it was 50 minutes or something, and they were still asking me questions. The students were still asking me questions. I think I spent an extra maybe 20 minutes answering their questions about they were specifically seemed keenly interested in our go-to-market strategy and our distribution network. So it was fascinating to get that kind of that I did not expect that level of interest. And I've spoken to some of the other textile company presenters from here in Rhode Island, and they've had exactly the same response that I had, that these students were riveted and highly interested in not so much the textile product itself, but everything that revolved around that.
The whole world of it, yeah. And that's, again, just like we were talking about earlier. Now, these are seniors. And the TA is a grad student. And they are just blown away by the reality being presented to them of how complex and interesting and how many opportunities there are in this world. And I love it. I think it's just great. I mean, this is what education should be. I feel this is how it should work. It should be a voyage of discovery and hands-on engagement, and to have the students, like you said, I remember that. Yeah, they just mobbed you at the end, and it's been absolutely great.
And you and I and Robert Finnegan from AFO actually have a upcoming meeting. I think it's next week with the Community College of Rhode Island to figure out how we take that edited footage and turn it into a course for the community college. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we have our eyes on all levels of education, ambitious if that may sound. We want to be able to reach the high schoolers. We want to be able to reach the community college. We want this to be available. So for any student who starts to develop an interest in the industry, they can take a look at the world of it from the inside. And we really want it to be at a level that they can reach easily and clearly. And so far, like I say, the slot machine is paying off.
Yeah, my vision, and I mentioned this at the Ryton meeting a couple of weeks ago, is that in terms of a high school level course like this, instead of highlighting our business model, we highlight our machines and equipment in an effort to get folks not on a college track, students not on a college track, interested in running some of our, advanced equipment in our factories. And we'll see how it goes. But I think that would be very interesting at a high school level.
Yeah, and I think that will be extremely interesting, not on a high school level, at every level, because there is a sense of one thing I noticed with all of you who have come and spoken to the students is the sense of adventure about the whole thing, that this is exciting, that this is a dynamic kind of workplace, and there's an underlying creativity, of course, regardless of whether you look at creativity as something you do with your hands or whether you do it with your head or even with your heart. I mean, there's a level of engagement here that I don't think students see in the course of their study. I'm just really excited to be able to bring this to the kids, and I can say the kids because I'm old enough, but I think
And
it's great.
you're talking about engagement and the student engagement, but you and I were fortunate to have the opportunity to present on this topic at the SEAMS conference late last year. It was before the course had actually begun.
Mhm.
And the engagement of the folks during that conference from companies that were in North Carolina and other places in the Southeast were, some of the questions were, okay, how did you put this program together? And is it something that is applicable in other regions of the country? Your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think that's one of the benefits of what we're doing here is that we can do this and we can create this for us in this region, and we have gradually expanded beyond Rhode Island, and it's you hear how I now talk about the Narragansett Bay region and so on, but we're creating a model that can be adapted anywhere else. If we can do this for this region, somebody else can take it and do it for their region. There's no reason why somebody in the Southwest or the Northwest or anywhere can just say, okay, what is our regional order? What area are we looking at? And then they can just do exactly the same thing. This is not something Rhode Island specific or New England specific.
Yeah, and big
So,
vision should be applied in other types of manufacturing, not
oh,
simply
absolutely.
not only
Absolutely.
to, yeah.
Absolutely. Simply a model. We're creating a model even as we're creating the content.
And
And
just for the folks out there listening, you and I, along with Robert Finnegan from AFOA, will be presenting our results of this course at the ATA Expo that is taking place in early November down in Orlando. So I'm still hoping we can get one of the students down there to also talk about their experience in the course. But we should have so I encourage anyone who's interested in this topic to come and visit our presentation when we're down there in Orlando in early November. That's going to be fun.
yeah, I'm looking forward to having at least a good sample of what the product will look like in terms of educational material once we're down there in
Yeah.
November. The summer work will focus on sort of hammering this into shape as much as we can, and
And
then we'll
we may have
keep going.
some video that we can show at that point, right, Karl?
Oh, no
Right.
doubt. We already have footage that at one of the writing meetings the other day, there was a little sizzle reel that was shown. But we will definitely have something that is very close to what the kind of educational product we want to be creating. We'll have that to show in November, no doubt, because over the summer, we'll not only be editing the footage we've got into concise material, but we'll also be getting backup materials and site visits. So we now have, let's just say your example, you came and we talked to you, and we have, a good 20 minutes of usable footage of what you were telling us. But now we will also bring in materials. You mentioned a certain machine, you mentioned a certain process, you mentioned, okay, what is dye sublimation? Great. Now there's material linked for the student to go and check on that. Remember, this is course material. So if you mention a process or a chemical or a something, that student's going to have to go check on that. What is that? And then we're going to come to your premises. We're going to film there. We're going to talk to people on the floor. You mention a machine, we're going to show that machine on the screen. So this is much more than just the visits. We're creating documentaries, if you will, educational documentaries about these various companies. And now we've got the 8, and next year we'll do another 8, and then the third year we'll do another 8. And it'll be fun to show this off in November.
We actually had we had more companies volunteering than we were able to use for this particular course. So we have quite a bit of talent in the bullpen for the next go around.
Which in itself is an amazing thing to look at, that we can do this just in our little region.
Yes.
Talk about being able to create a model for other places. If we can do this here, can you imagine what other places with larger industrial bases can do?
So a question about Karl the professor, pre-Wrighton URI collaboration and post collaboration. Has the advice that you would give to students who are entering the textile industry, or students or recent graduates, has that changed over the course of these last 8 years in our involvement together with this collaboration?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And don't forget that I'm a professor of design and design theory. So I came in very much from that side of things. So my voyage of discovery is something that I also relay now to the students, of how complex and rich this world is just here in our state. And I really tell them to keep an open mind on this. Keep looking at what is available here. It's not all design, 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 design in distant, large metropolis areas. There's a lot going on here on the ground. And so I really advocate to the students to maintain a very hands-on and open mind about what's going on in their neighborhood. So that's been a big change for me, and it relates to the things that over the years we also have to really address. I mean, there are the sustainability issues, there are the made in the USA issues, and these all hook together with local production and local economies. So it all goes hand in hand. But I really want the students to understand their regional world. It matters, it really matters.
This is a bit out of order, but can you relate the story? I'll never forget the story you once told me about your engagement, your surprise engagement with the space program. Can you relate that story? Because I think the folks listening in would get a kick out of it.
Yeah, okay. So for the past 14 years, I've been a member of a group called the 100-Year Starship, which had its origins back in 2012 as an initiative that was seed funded by DARPA, the Defense Department's Advanced Research. And this initiative was given the mandate to do all the necessary fostering and inspiring and researching and disseminating of the necessary knowledge to get humans out of the solar system by 2112, hence the 100 years. And I heard about this kind of by accident. I had what they call an NPR driveway moment. I was absolutely exhausted one morning driving home from the hospital. My daughter had been very ill. We almost lost her. And then she was fine. And the doctor said, Dad, get out of here, go home. And so I was in my car, dead tired. And I hear the astronaut, Dr. Mae Jemison, on an NPR interview program in my car. And I'm listening to this on the way home. And then I have my driveway moment. I'm sitting in the driveway and I can't stop listening. It's fascinating. They're going to send people out of the solar system. Holy moly. And so I go into the house, and in my sort of rather confused and tired state, I look up Mae Jemison and I send an email. And I say, is anybody thinking about the clothing and textiles here? And then I went to sleep and kind of just forgot about it. And 2 days later, I got a call. I was actually back in the hospital, standing by my daughter's bed. My phone rings, and it's one of Mae's team who says, we saw your email. Nobody's thinking about this. Can you come down to Houston? And 2 weeks later, I was at the first 100-year Starship conference in Houston, talking to a plenary session of literally rocket scientists and astrophysicists about laundry and clothing repair and textiles, and pointing out to them that if you're going to send people out of the solar system, it's a one-way mission. You got to sell this. And interesting fact, laundry in space is still a problem. Just think about it, gravity and water, okay? But so since then, I became the apparel and textiles guy in the 100-year Starship team. And I'm also a doctor of anthropology and material culture. So the human behavior side of it also fits in very nicely with keeping the crew healthy and happy, and making sure that they're not irritated because they don't have any more socks.
Some of those rocket scientists must have looked at the agenda and said, what is this textile guy doing here?
They did. Well, I wasn't even on the agenda because it was so close to the conference. But Mae told me afterward that she got some really quizzical looks and like, what are you doing? Why? Who's this guy? And why do you have a textile professor barging into the conference? And I have to tell the story here, and I guess somebody's going to have to bleep me because I have to quote directly. But I was having coffee with an astrophysicist that was there the next morning, and he said, when I saw the first slide go up and I realized what you were going to talk about, the only thought going through my head was, oh, crap. Now we have to think about this. And he didn't use the word crap, by the way. Fill in whatever you want. But yeah, now we have to think about this. And yeah, we have been thinking about this. And it's an interesting thing that the research and the thinking that goes into this is feeding right back into what's happening in terms of what I want to do here on the home planet. Because if you can solve the local maintenance and the circularity and the sustainability for a group of people, and this will be hundreds of people, this will be 1,000 or more people. If you think about a Starship or a Mars base, you've solved it for Wakefield. You've solved it for a small community. You've solved it for a neighborhood in Manhattan, if you can solve it for space. And vice versa. If I can solve it for the Bronx, hey, Mars is going to be fine. So to me, it doesn't even matter anymore whether we're talking about Earth or space. The Earth is a starship going through space. It just has a lot of people on it.
Yeah,
but
true.
Limited resources, survivability. Mae says, what we need for survival in space is what we need for survival on Earth. And that's my favorite mantra in all of this.
So one final question about Karl, not about Dr. Aspelund, but about Karl. How does a young man growing up in Iceland end up playing acoustic Delta blues? How does that happen?
He marries a Rhode Island local girl from Westerly who spent her teenage years in the local music scene down there, which is rife with blues musicians and a lot of dancing. And so I got to keep up, man. I got to hang on to that girl.
Well, Hanging by a Thread will likely be playing at Industry Night in November down in Orlando. So maybe we can get you up there to play some Lead Belly or some Book of White or something like that.
I'll bring my acoustic and my slide.
Cool. Sounds good. Thank you for joining us for this episode of ATA Talking Textiles. ATA is a not-for-profit association representing the international specialty fabrics marketplace. Learn more about the events, workshops, and webinars ATA hosts throughout the year at textiles.org/events.